Going beyond the headlines. Asking the questions you want answered. Exploring government policies and how they impact you. We are delving deeper.
Good evening and welcome to Delving Deeper. I am Sonolala filling in for Ayana Carter. Joining us this evening is Mr. John Outridge. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago International Financial Center. Good evening, Mr. Outridge, and welcome to the show.
Hey, good evening, Sonal.
Before we get into a discussion about One Fintech Avenue, share with us, what exactly is the mandate of the TTIFC?
Sure. So TTIFC, which is really the acronym for Trinidad and Tobago International Financial Center, the mandate of the company was adjusted back in April 2021 to focus on three key things. One, increasing and advancing the levels of financial inclusion within the country. Two, in terms of advancing the digitization of payments within the public sector. And three, basically establishing the foundation for Trinidad and Tobago to be a fintech-enabled hub for the rest of the Caribbean.
We always hear this term financial inclusion. Tell us about exactly what that means for the average person on the street.
So financial inclusion in its basic term is basically allowing persons to participate in what we call the formal economy. And this is by providing them with the means and mechanisms where they can transact digitally. Because when you transact in cash, it doesn't really create what I would call proper transaction records for you to then go to a financial institution to access credit, to borrow money, or to engage in any of those products and services. So it's really about bringing people into the economy, allowing them to participate, borrow, and really advance their own financial status.
Now, Mr. Outridge, earlier this month, we saw the official launch of One Fintech Avenue. What exactly is One Fintech Avenue, in your words?
So One Fintech Avenue is basically the initiative from the government of Trinidad and Tobago, where you'd have seen other international jurisdictions such as Singapore, Luxembourg, Colombia, have what we call a fintech ecosystem. And in all of these sort of advanced economies, you have what we would call a sort of facility where innovation could be curated, as well as providing what I would call an access point for international and local entities focused within a sector, which this being fintech, which is really a sort of growing segment what we see within the region. So One Fintech Avenue is meant to provide education to both the population, the government, stakeholders in terms of fintech and the opportunities. It's also meant to facilitate innovation. So within the facility itself, we have access to a lot of cutting-edge technology from international partners like Visa and Huawei, and is also to allow for acceleration for our own local entrepreneurs who are within the fintech sector. So they themselves get access to these, what I would call international facilities, partner with international entities to then scale their own products and services into the rest of the region and to the wider market.
This is basically, going into a cashless society. Do you think TNT is ready for that? And how soon do you think we can actually get to that point?
So cashless society is the term, but from where we have sort of seen the trend, if we could get a less cash society, I think that is the goal at this point in time. When you look at across the region and even locally, cash is still king. A lot of people transact in cash. At this point in time, we're actually doing a financial inclusion study across Trinidad and Tobago. And some of the data we are getting is, there's still a large percentage of the population, almost 70% of transactions are still being done in cash. And when we see the types of uses that they use in cash for, it's really, as citizens, what we experience is sort of day-to-day, whether you're buying groceries, even paying school fees, or access to transportation. And again, when you look at it, it's really because there is a lack of what I would call products where persons can use digital payments. So you have no choice but to use cash, So we are seeing the opportunities where, again, One Fintech Avenue can play a role in terms of incentivizing players to then offer those solutions to the citizens, which will then sort of create that sort of connectivity.
Yeah, there's always this little reluctance, for persons to go cashless, because we always see people, they like the physical aspect of money being in their hand. And we also see the reluctance of the older heads. Is there possibly a marketing plan or somewhat to get them to buy into this?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a key thing, right? Because one of the biggest gaps is really around the public education and awareness, right? Exactly from what you said there, right? In terms of even recently, you would have seen, a lot of merchants, a lot of banks starting to roll out what we call tap and pay terminals. And even see the older heads in the population when they go in to do purchases, and you would see a cashier, for example, advise them, well, no, you can just tap your card. And they're like, what? This card could do that? So even just the general awareness, and this is one of the things that we're doing through our sort of cashless campaign. So all the government online services that we are enabling are part of what we call the cashless umbrella. And through that platform is where we're going to communicate and reach out to communities in terms of helping educate them in terms of the benefits of using cashless. Not just that these facilities exist, but why you should use digital payments and the benefits that will bring to them. Security, convenience, as well as building their own, what I would call thickening their credit profile.
Is it that you believe, the older heads in particular, there's that issue of the security of using that technology and so on? How do we get past this?
I wouldn't say it's just the older segment of the population. I think it's a general sort of consensus across all cohorts, because you have a number of different factors, age being one, but also religion, also trust, right? Even your relationship with a financial institution. This is something we've seen where there is still a lot of uncertainty and a lot of mistrust when it comes to people and finances. When you see what's happening worldwide with banks and all of these different things, particularly with failures, and then in sophisticated products like cryptocurrency and so forth, a lot of misinformation still out there, So so it is a multifaceted problem, and this is why we're trying to look at all different angles in terms of, how do we provide the relevant pain points to really reach with those different segments.
Back to One Fintech Avenue, how is this going to benefit the man on the streets, the average citizen that is?
Yeah, certainly. So the same things that we were just speaking about earlier, right? How does it impact the average citizen and the man in the street, right? And there's a couple of things. When you look at even the local market in terms of the facilities available, largely for small businesses, for example, and when I say small businesses, I'm talking about the micro and small, medium enterprise sector. A lot of the stores, for example, if you go just right on Independence Square in Port of Spain and you want to pay for something, they don't have a terminal. They don't have any sort of facility where you could accept cards, right? And it's really a kind of supply and demand, because there's such a huge segment of that part of the economy that aren't traditionally serviced by the banks. And even when you look at the infrastructures available, right, these terminals are very expensive, and there's only a certain supply that the banks could even supply to that part of the market. So One Fintech Avenue, the benefit for the man in the street is where we are hoping, well, not hoping, I would say, we're actually seeing a lot of evidence of it, where we have these young fintech players who are able to come into the market and provide mobile wallets, electronic money, point-of-sale terminals that could operate on your phone. This is where fintech really is the bridge between the customer and the business. This is what fintech does better than the traditional institutions. They're able to provide those customized solutions, where we have these EMIs like PayWise, for example, who are operating in the sector right now, where they provide the infrastructure to the small business, and the small business is now able to accept money digitally on the phone. And when you look at the size of the population here in TNT, while we say we are small, there's a lot of opportunity where we see a lot of those local players being able to provide those services to the man in the street. So then that means having to go to anywhere and walk with cash. Those days are slowly becoming numbered. So I can just simply walk with my phone and be able to transact. So, it adds an even increased level of security to the average citizen.
I was recently in India, Mr. Outridge, and as you talk about mobile wallets, I noticed something across there, even persons paying via their phones.
Correct.
The taxi driver going into the gas station, not even going up to the ATMs and so on to make those transactions, but just paying the gas for the gas out of their phones and getting that service.
Yeah.
Do you believe, this one fintech avenue, this is a step towards that?
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at what the journey India actually has gone through, it's really sort of parallel to what we do in here in Trinidad, right? India went through a huge demonetization exercise themselves, right? Obviously, India is nearly 2 billion people, right? So it's by far, a lot of scale. But when you look at the population, it's very decentralized. They live in a lot of rural areas. So even doing trade, or even the government being able to pay citizens, persons having to travel in to the center to get payments and so forth, And you're right, India has actually taken a similar approach to us where, they have, at the government level, put policies in place and put infrastructure in place called UPI, which is a sort of amalgamated payment system. And what you're seeing happening is you have a lot of fintechs in India now offering those services. So the fact that you're seeing the average citizen in India being able to pay for gas and so forth using what I call UPI-enabled wallets, all of that is fintech. And that is the same approach that we are taking here. What we are trying to do with One Fintech Avenue is to basically amalgamate all of that talent and even provide the international partners. Just the day before I came here, actually, I was meeting with a fintech from India who participated in that UPI program. And one of the things that they were asking is, where can we find local partners to work with? And then, we're able to introduce them to the center, and this is where we'll have follow-up meetings and so forth. So it creates that ecosystem to create those partnerships.
So talk to us about exactly how is this going to help both the public and private sectors to go towards that digital payment service?
Yeah, sure. So we see One Fintech Avenue as that central location. So let's talk about the private sector. When we talk about the private sector, we're largely talking about our own local financial institutions. They themselves are looking for partners to be able to offer what I would call new products that they can then offer to their customers. This is where they can come and basically facilitate demonstrations with those partners, be able to interact with them, understand where they're going, where their roadmap, create those sort of partnerships. And then what we would want to see happening is where you would see, for example, more products like Encash, for example, more local fintech solutions being offered in the ecosystem by creating those partnerships. And then on the fintech side, when you think about it, Trinidad has a very diverse financial ecosystem. A large percentage of our financial sector operates throughout the region. So the vision is those same solutions that we implement in Trinidad and Tobago, through those partnerships, those same local fintechs can now scale. They can operate in their region, which now creates more employment for locals, provides them scalability, drives investment. And then, the sort of the good aspect of it is what they're also doing is converting cash. So you're sort of shrinking that shadow economy and now providing opportunities, to participate in the economy across the entire region.
Is there a cost associated with this?
No, there's no cost. Actually, this entire facility was actually accommodated and supported by the private sector. So even we had a mix of international and local partners, international, Visa, Huawei, the United Nations Capital Development Fund, locally, TSTT, Amaran Business Solutions. Because we communicated what this vision is meant to be, all of these players within here, they saw the benefits of the ecosystem. So no cost was actually borne to the state in operationalizing this facility. And the idea is that it's meant to be a venue for the private sector to come and crowd in and enable. So it's not a cost for anyone to use. What we hope is that we also provide a channel for even international parties, other entities looking to come in, other multilaterals to then provide programs and funding through this facility to the local ecosystem. So we really see it as an opportunity to tap into a lot of the, what I would call the funding availability that's coming into the region, because there is a lot of conversations taking place across the world in terms of what we call financial inclusion, because that is very, very high on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals perspective.
Now, I understand the One Fintech Avenue. This is actually the first regional hub we have here in the Caribbean.
Sure.
Why was this so long to be into effect in the Caribbean?
So, I always say nothing really happens before its time, right? And to be honest, even this journey started about a year ago. And I was actually in Miami, and I visited a innovation facility that was actually developed by Visa in Miami. Because, one of the things I want to understand is what are the developments that are taking place in fintech and in the payments industry? What are some of the new things that we've seen happening in the US, and, where could I learn more? And when I was inquiring with the persons who were doing that tour for me, I was like, does anything similar like this exist in the region? It's like, no. So I was like, if I'm a Caribbean business person or government institution or fintech and I want to find out more about what's happening, where can I go to find it? They said, well, no, you have to come here to Miami. So, I started to dawn about it, this here it is more, tourism, more traversion is going to be happening to the north, When we look at what's happening in the Caribbean, we equally have those same capabilities and that opportunity. So why not be the first? Why not create that innovation center here in the Caribbean? And even speaking to them, they were like, no, that'll be fantastic because we also have customers in Latin America who have to come all the way to Miami. So why not have them come into Port of Spain trying to be able to understand these same products and services? So from that perspective, we realized that there was that sort of opportunity that we could capitalize on.
We always see Trinidad and Tobago, leading in many of these spheres and so on. With regards to some of the Caribbean countries, how do you think they're going to look at us now in terms of coming to Trinidad and Tobago to get the education or the information about this regional hub as well?
Sure. And the funny thing is this is the one sector I have seen where there has been a lot of conversations and collaborations among the Caribbean countries. You have a lot of entities, speaking to each other from St. Lucia and in Jamaica. Because when you look at the innovation in this space, the Caribbean has been leading the rest of the world. When you look at what Bermuda and the USCS did in terms of central bank digital currency, those were the first two pilots globally. So we have been leading in this space in the region, to be quite honest, in terms of experimenting. And what I do see is that it's going to be a welcome opportunity for all fintechs across the region. Because as I said, even in developing this concept, we had a number of conversations with regional partners and regional players to find out, is this something that they would support? And they were all absolutely on board. As an example for that, we actually will have regional fintechs coming into TT and representatives from other financial institutions to be part of One Fintech Avenue, where we'll be doing boot camps for Caribbean Fintech Sprint, which we launched months ago, to do the finalization and for us to select the winners of that competition.
In anything you do, there's always challenges. Were there challenges to get this off the ground? As you said, this took almost a year to get it off the ground as well.
To be honest, every time people ask me that question, I don't think we had challenges. We had more opportunities. The challenge was really and truly how to, what I would call, filter the interests in terms of what we were doing, because we had so many persons wanting to come on board, and there was only so much things that we could have accommodated. When this One Fintech Avenue started, we wanted to do the entire flow, but we wanted to make sure that we had a good proof of concept, something that we could launch and execute well. So I would say the real challenge was really scaling back the vision, starting with where we want to be, which is really the innovation center and the co-working facility, as well as providing the enabling technology. But in the future, and not too distant future, we want to really expand into what I would call more acceleration programs, more solution programs, and now creating what I would call international linkages with other hubs globally and formalizing those partnerships. So I wouldn't say we have challenges, we have a lot more opportunity.
Mr. Outridge, what would you say to persons, not willing to embrace this sort of technology? Because, we always have these advances in technology, but the buy-in from persons not always there. What would you say to these people?
Well, I was one of those persons. Right? I can tell you right after the pandemic, when the banks were saying you can no longer come into our banking halls and they were pushing you to use the technology, I was one of those persons in the line, because I always like to interact with a human being, right? And it was a challenge, when you had to go and deposit money in the ATM and do all your businesses via the ATM and so forth, So I would kind of communicate to those persons, I am seeing a lot more advancement, a lot more user friendliness in terms of the solutions. The benefits are, as a customer, you don't want to be seeking what I would call any of these benefits programs or you won't want to be seeking any promotions. You want those things being pushed to you, customized to you. So the more you use these services, the more that you are allowing yourself to be sort of customized by the industry, and you're getting all these good benefits and offers in terms of, if you're a person you like to travel and that you have that transaction history, the institution might say, hey, here's a travel card, and here's what, if you use this card, you might be able to save 500 US on bookings. For example, a lot of people don't realize that, if you have institutions down here who are now offering specialty cards. If you're a person who like to go out and dine, you could use this card. You go to the Hyatt, for example, you'll save $300 on the bill, But again, understanding and having a track record allows the institutions to provide customized products. So data, again, in the right way.
Is there an advantage to using these sort of technology? Because we always see people budgeting with their disposable income and so on.
Sure.
And will they now be able to track these records and to be able to budget better for themselves on a monthly basis?
Absolutely. We have that, and that's where the fintech comes in, right? Because we have these fintech companies now who are building those capabilities on those products. So one thing you realize now is sometimes when you're spending on your card, you're not keeping track on what you're exactly spending on. And, particularly in these times where you're trying to be able to save as much as possible, you may find yourself, when you go back into these apps and realize what I've been spending on, and realize, oh, I shouldn't be going to this particular supermarket, or I shouldn't be going to this particular restaurant, and really given an opportunity to see how am I spending from my wants, from my needs versus my savings, and giving me tips how I should be spending better. Like, for example, I have a colleague of mine, he only goes to Macy's on a Wednesday because he can get double points. But again, inherently, you don't think about these things, and there's a lot of things that we could do in terms of changing our behavior, which allows us to really capitalize on our spend and get benefits back,
In the news these days, we've seen a lot of reports of persons being robbed after leaving the ATMs. I mean, we're seeing numerous reports every single day. Is this something that one Fintech Avenue and, that advancement in technology, do you think there can be somewhat of a decrease in those kind of reports as this goes along?
It is definitely meant to address that pain point directly, because, I saw even recently, it was like nearly over $1 million were sort of resulted in theft from persons going into banks and withdrawing large sums of money. Yeah. And this is where we see the need for fintech to develop those solutions to allow persons to do those sort of transactions. And a case in point, persons may be going to the bank to take out those large sums of money because they may probably have to go and do a transaction that calls for cash, and it's really about building their trust in those products and services, but also they may probably want different products or services to accommodate those transactions, where, for example, in the health sector, sometimes you might go to institutions and, may have the doctors there might be asking for payment in cash and so forth. But again, being able to transact through mobile money, because sometimes people may not have a bank account, or they may be taking the money to give somebody who does not have a bank account, in terms of being able to do those transactions. There may be other reasons, but we see fintech at least being able to provide that channel to do those sorts of transactions.
How quickly do you think this is going to progress? Because we need to see buy-in from the actual man on the street. Because if I want to go out and I don't want to work with physical cash, that is something, the street vendor, you will have to work with that physical cash to get these things done. How soon do you think TNT can get there?
I think definitely we have the potential to get there and get there very quickly. I mean, one of the insights we're getting from that national study we're doing is that Trinidad and Tobago, we don't have an access problem. We have number of financial institutions. We have more ATMs and schools. You have a lot of optionality when it comes. And even some of the studies we do, over 80% of the population actually has access to a bank account. Our challenge is utilization, because less than 40% of people actually use their cards to do transactions. What you find happening is they would take all of their money out of their account and then choose to transact in cash. And those are some of the things we're trying to get to the bottom of, right? So, I mean, and simple use cases, as you said there, right? If I want to go to the Savannah and buy food on a Friday evening, there's no vendor in the Savannah that offers point-of-sale systems. So I would have to go and take out cash and you go to the Savannah. But when you think about the impact of that is, one, security, but then two, even for those vendors on the Savannah, I could only buy based on the amount of cash I have, and I'll probably only take out a limited amount of cash. So it's also restricting trade, where people might want to buy a souvenir or some impulse buy or get something else, So we have, I would say, a good start in terms of some of the products. We already have a lot of institutions offering those services from a fintech perspective. It's really now about more awareness and to sort of increase the adoption by, getting what I would say, focusing on particular segments of society and particular use cases. If you think about it, if you go into church, for example, and you have to pay, you're giving tithes when they're passing around. If you have a $5 in a pocket, that's what you might want to give. But let's just say if the priest is saying, we're trying to collect money for a special cause, if somebody's able to pass a terminal and be like, well, I have more money in my account, I might pay $40. So you understand how it starts to create those opportunities. So looking at those use cases, I think, is definitely going to help us at least provide proof of concepts and then scale from there.
Since the launch of One Fintech Avenue earlier this month, or even before, have you gotten customers or even businesses interested in this already?
Oh yeah, we have bookings, I would say, carrying us to the next 6 months. There's huge amounts of interest and potential. What we're trying to do now is to really schedule those in, because we have all sorts of different segments of society and fintechs wanting to come in and what I would call do their own private tours and get that sort of understanding, while we also want to facilitate a more organic approach for persons coming in, So it definitely has been oversubscribed up to this point, and even from international parties. So I think our biggest challenge would be scheduling from that perspective.
How does one make the switch? So if I was interested in this One Fintech Avenue to get on this platform and so on, what is the process to do that?
Sure. So we have a website, onefintechavenue.com. So you go on that website and, you can book on tour, you can book a co-working space. So we have a calendaring system on there. So that's the first port of call that we're sort of working on, We want to expand it into other touch points, do a little more campaigns and promotion so people are more aware about it and be able to do booking via kiosks and terminals, But the idea is that we want to continue to create the traffic through the ecosystem because even for the population, if they could come upstairs and they could interact with the technology and they could get understanding and they can, come to that conclusion themselves. That's one of the key things we want to do. We have what we call a technology showcase where they could come and interact with a payment app on an iPad and they can use an online payment system on the kiosk, where we'll be facilitating even government payment systems where if they want to come and pay the bill upstairs there, we could have people to kind of walk them through. So it does provide also a man on the street component from an education perspective. And it helps that we are located right by the waterfront, so it's easy access.
For the average man on the streets, the average woman, is there age limit to use this platform?
No, it's open to all walks of life. Ideally, we would want to start to look at the younger side of the population because when you look at what's happening in today's world of work, people are no longer going to school to look to get an education, to go and work in an institution. They're looking to start their own businesses. You have this sort of entrepreneurship culture that is taking place, So we want young people to understand the opportunities. When you look at what's happening in fintech globally, it's an extremely growth sector. Some of the most valuable companies are in fintech classes, So we want to be able to provide that opportunity and that understanding that if I want to be in fintech, I don't have to go to New York. I can actually be here. I could be in Trinidad and I could start that initiative.
Earlier, we talked about this being the first regional hub in the Caribbean. How is TNT planning to capitalize on that?
So one of the things that we absolutely plan to do is to really, as I said, go into these other Caribbean markets, meet with the stakeholders, invite them to come to TT, invite them to meet with our local ecosystem and vice versa. Already in the region, you have a number of what I would call dedicated platforms and conferences, particularly around fintech. You had Fintech Islands, which started 2 years ago. We're also having a lot of fintech conferences in the Bahamas taking place. What we're trying to do is to really, what I would call, reverse the flow of innovation. Typically, the innovation starts in the north and then comes down south. What we want to do is to start from the south and start driving innovation upwards, So this center is really meant to start that conversion.
Any interview I have, I always like to ask this question. What's next for the TTIFC in the coming months and years?
Definitely, from the mandate we have and a lot of initiatives we do, and one being the financial inclusion study, rolling out of digital payments with the government of Trinidad and Tobago. So already, we would have rolled out 4 platforms: the HEC, the Judiciary, the Ministry of Works and Transport, and the Ministry of Trade and Industry. We want to expand on that, and as well on One Fintech Avenue. So we want to take that a step further and basically digitize, if almost the entire public sector. I will at least try to digitize a number of different agencies before the end of the year, because there's so much work to be done. We have to now create the opportunities for the fintech then. So the only way we can do that is demand and supply. So through One Fintech Avenue, it gives us access to good entrepreneurs, which we can then use in this digitalization agenda. So our idea is to really sort of progress on that less cash opportunity for Trinidad and Tobago.
When we talk about being a cashless society, persons always think, paying with your links or your credit card, that's the only way to be a cashless society. But they don't realize that it's in the digital wallet and so on. Do you think there's a need to push forward this information towards the general public?
Yeah, absolutely. And through platforms like this is where we want to sort of communicate more on cashless and the benefits, and do programs and do a lot of communication and community outreach, actually go in and get that understanding, because it's only through that sort of direct communication, I think, is where we could start to change some of the mindsets and sort of, ease some of the anxiety as we go along this journey. Because, typically when you look, a lot of these things are sort of driven through social media as well, right? When you look, for example, what happened in Canada during the pandemic, where the truck drivers, for example, didn't want to take the vaccine, and the state intervened by saying, we'll freeze their bank accounts. Those things, those messages, you won't believe how they impact other areas of society. We already have, quite a, what I would call conspiracy theorist sort of mindset going on across the globe, right? So those things don't help, So we want to be able to provide that direct sort of intervention, in order to get at it. It's not going to happen overnight, but I do think as we continue to move forward and people start seeing the benefits, that FOMO effect should start to take place.
Is there any assurance you can, as you talk about the conspiracy theories and so on, is there any assurance you can give to the persons who may not so much be interested in this, who may have a mindset that, this is going to take my money, I'm not going to get it back? What assurance can you give to those persons?
So, one of the interesting things coming out of the survey that we heard, right, which was very, very interesting, when we asked people, by transacting in so much cash, you are making yourself a target, in terms of crime. You are basically providing an opportunity for somebody to take that money. One of the responses we got from somebody was, even if somebody steals the money, in my mind, there's a recourse, there's a process. I can go to a police station and I can say I was robbed by a person wearing a short pants and a blue jersey, and there's a potential where I can probably get my money back. In this whole realm of digital payments and so forth, if money goes missing from my account, what is the process? Who am I to turn to? So we do realize consumer protection is a key component in terms of helping to sort of drive that perspective, and the reality is you're much more, in terms of even just misplacing cash. You always hear stories about you leaving $100 in your jeans and it ended up in the washing machine, right? And we saw what happened when the government, again, changed the $100 note to the polymers, and the amount of cash that people had at home, right? And all of those things that would have occurred, right? So at least if your money is in a financial institution, it's insured, it's secured. Trinidad has an extremely good track record in terms of the stability of the financial ecosystem, right? So it's really about trying to educate in terms of, those sort of benefits. So I mean, and from assurance perspective, a lot higher by using electronically, right? Now you see cards have migrated to chip and pin. So the days of your card being skimmed by the mark stripe, all of those things are starting to disappear. Even when you look at internationally with the payment systems and the standards, now you have the international companies like Visa and MasterCard now pushing more secure standards. So now, if something happens to your card and God forbid, somebody takes your card and tries to buy a jet ski in China, it's now the impetus on the banks to provide that sort of security, right? It's no longer liability, it's no longer on you. It's sort of shifting. So there's a lot happening to what I would call increase the confidence in using digital payments, not just here, but internationally.
Talking about financial crimes, do you think this is going to bring a little more accountability into the frame
Well, if you think about it, the definition of financial crime is usually done with cash, right? It's brown envelopes with dollars coming in, right? When you think about when you transact digitally, you create electronic paper trail. It's easy to see the flow of money and so forth. So the fact that if we get less cash through the system, there's a lot more transparency and accountability in able to deal with that, right? Now, we're not talking about cryptocurrency, which is the sort of equivalent, and the jury is out on that. We've all seen what's happening globally, but the drive towards cashless really sort of minimizes the opportunities for persons to be engaged in money laundering, because you see all over the world, for example, anti-money laundering and counterterrorism financing, those things are really now stepping up. So it's very, very hard for persons being able to transact through the formal electronic system, to support those sort of activities.
Mr. Outridge, your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are, I think now I feel Trinidad and Tobago is going through a sort of renaissance area. There is so much opportunities. There's so much happening on the ground when it comes to innovation, No longer I feel like, we have any conversation about, the opportunities to be innovative. I feel like those opportunities are happening. Even at the launch of One Fintech Avenue, we had a lot of local fintechs showing up. And you could feel the energy. Even they themselves, we had a lot of persons who were returning from abroad, and it was like, they're just feeling the ecosystem and the energy, and it's so much more positive, and there's so much more opportunities, So my sort of perspective is, for anybody who looking to get into this space or be in technology or be an entrepreneur, now is the best time to get into that space, because there's so much opportunities, not just in the public sector through initiatives, what we're doing, but also in the private sector, and even from the region. This conversation is happening, I can tell you, across, how do we increase the levels of financial inclusion across the territories? How do we allow more people into the formal economy? How are we able to distribute grants, for example, more efficiently, and this now creates that opportunity for the sector. So I'm extremely enthused and excited based on what's happening.
Mr. Outridge, thanks very much for joining us on the show tonight. I'm sure the public would have learned quite a lot about financial inclusion, about One Fintech Avenue, and so on. Join us at the same time next week for another episode of Delving Deeper. I am Sonalala, and on behalf of the entire crew, have a great night.